My son grabbed me by the collar at Thanksgiving dinner and shoved me into my own bookshelf. I heard the crack before I felt it, the edge of the oak shelf, catching me just above my right eyebrow. My daughter-in-law watched it happen. She didn't move. She didn't scream. She just looked at the papers spread across my dining room table, papers she had demanded I sign 90 seconds earlier, and she smiled. I didn't yell. I didn't call the police from the kitchen. I pressed my handkerchief against the cut, picked up my car keys from the hook by the door, and drove myself to the urgent care on Ridgeline Avenue. In the parking lot, before I even walked inside, I opened my phone and typed a message to my attorney, Frank Holloway. Phase 1 is complete. What my son and his wife did not know was that every word spoken in that dining room had been recorded for the past 7 months. What my son specifically did not know was that I had paid off every dollar of his debt quietly, anonymously 2 months before Thanksgiving. He didn't need to come for my house. He had already been given a way out. He came for it anyway. My name is Walter Kane. I am 67 years old. I spent 35 years as a special agent with the FBI, White Collar Crime Division. I have sat across from CEOs who cried and swore their innocence while the wire transfers were printing behind me. I have watched families implode over inheritance disputes, business fraud, forged signatures. I know exactly how greed moves. I know the way it starts slow and polite, then shifts into something harder and faster the closer it gets to the money. I thought I would never have to apply that knowledge to my own son. I was wrong. My wife Margaret died 2 years ago this past September. Breast cancer. We had 41 years together in our house in Asheville, the one I built the back porch on by hand because she wanted somewhere to drink her morning coffee and watch the mountains. After she was gone, the house felt like it had more rooms than I could account for. My son Derek called more frequently those first few months. He and his wife Sandra came for Christmas. They stayed a week. I cooked. I was grateful for the company. Then the calls started changing. It was gradual at first, the way these things always are. Derek would mention, casually, that the house was probably more square footage than I needed. Sandra would comment on property values in Asheville, how much land like mine was going for. They started referring to the upstairs hallway as wasted space. They started asking questions about my finances that had no natural place in conversation. How were my investments doing? Had I updated my will since Margaret passed? Was I thinking about simplifying? Simplifying. That was Sandra's word. I am not a suspicious man by nature. But 35 years of investigating financial crime teaches you a specific kind of pattern recognition that does not switch off when you retire. I started paying attention. 8 months ago, I got a call from an old colleague at the Bureau, a man I'd worked with for 15 years. He had left federal work and now ran a private consulting practice. He told me that a woman matching Sandra's description had reached out to a mutual contact, a disreputable elder law attorney who had shown up in 3 separate fraud investigations over the past decade. The woman had asked about the process for filing an emergency incompetency petition against an aging parent. I sat with that information for 2 days. Then I called Frank Holloway. Frank had been my attorney for 20 years. He was 71, still sharp as a filed edge, and the first thing he said when I explained the situation was, "How long do you want to give them?" I told him I wanted to be certain before I moved. I wanted evidence, not suspicion. I had built my career on the difference between those two things. We spent the next 3 weeks installing the system. Pinhole cameras in the living room, the dining room, my home office, audio recorders in the ceiling fixtures, calibrated to capture conversation at normal volume from any point in the room. Everything streamed to an encrypted server that Frank's firm managed off-site. I paid for a security consultation from a firm in Charlotte that did not know who I was or why I wanted it. Professional distance, clean chain of custody from the beginning. Then I started watching my son. What I found was not a monster. That would have been easier. What I found was a weak man who had been making bad decisions for 3 years and had run out of room. Derek had co-signed a business loan with Sandra's brother Rick, a $180,000 note, through a private lender that Frank immediately identified as operating on the legal margin. The business had failed in under 8 months. Rick had vanished to Phoenix. The lender was not the kind of institution that sent polite letters. Derek was drowning, and Sandra had convinced him there was only one life raft. I also found, through a contact at the insurance company where Sandra worked, that she was under internal audit for irregular claims processing. $46,000 moved through accounts she controlled, flagged by a junior analyst 3 months earlier. She was sitting on a live wire, and she knew it. They were not scheming against me out of greed alone. They were panicking. Desperate people in a corner make the worst decisions of their lives, and I had learned a long time ago that when desperate people panic, the best thing an investigator can do is step back and let them show you exactly who they are. 6 weeks before Thanksgiving, I did something that Frank strongly advised against. I paid off Derek's debt, all of it, $180,000, wired anonymously from an offshore account through a law firm in Delaware that had no traceable connection to me. The lender received full payment. Derek's obligation was cleared. He would have received notification within the week, a letter informing him the note was satisfied. Balance, 0. No further contact. I wanted to see what he would do with a clean slate. I wanted to know if my son was a desperate man who had made terrible choices under pressure, or if he was something else entirely. He called me on a Tuesday evening, 3 days after he would have received that letter. We spoke for 22 minutes. He asked about my health. He asked if I had finalized my estate documents since Margaret's passing. He asked, very carefully, whether I had ever considered giving him a power of attorney just as a precaution, he said, just so someone he trusted could handle things if anything ever happened to me. He never mentioned the debt. He never mentioned the letter. He spoke to me like a man with a plan that was still on schedule. Frank had warned me. Gabe. He had said he always called me Gabe. A habit from when we were younger. You are going to find out something you cannot unfind. I told him I already knew. I just needed the paperwork to confirm it. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I finalized the restructuring of the Margaret Kane Irrevocable Trust. It had existed for 4 years, established the month after Margaret's diagnosis, but Frank and I spent 2 days tightening every clause. The house, the investment accounts, the retirement funds, the property in Vermont, all of it transferred cleanly into the trust structure. The accounts Derek knew about, the ones I had mentioned casually over the years, held a combined balance of $11,000. They were real. They were just not where anything of substance lived. The decoy had been set for years. I had simply never needed it. Frank asked me what I planned to do about the Thanksgiving invitation. Derek had called in October and asked if they could come for the holiday. Sandra and her brother Rick, who had apparently returned from Phoenix. I told Frank the same thing I had told Derek. Of course. My home is your home. I spent the Wednesday before Thanksgiving making Margaret's recipes. Her sweet potato casserole, her cornbread stuffing, the cranberry relish she made every year with orange zest, and a splash of bourbon that she always denied putting in. I cleaned the house. I set the good china. I checked the camera feeds twice and confirmed the audio was live. I placed a slim digital recorder in the inside pocket of my cardigan, the same kind I had used in field work, no larger than a thick pen. I was not nervous. I was ready. They arrived at 1:30. Derek, Sandra, and Rick. Sandra was dressed like she was attending a closing. She had a leather folio under one arm. Rick wore a suit that was one size too large, and the careful expression of a man who knows he is the least important person in the room but is trying not to show it. I opened the door with a wide, easy smile. Come in. It's cold out there. I've got the fire going. Derek hugged me. It was the hug of a man in debt to someone he is about to betray, brief, slightly too firm, eyes somewhere over my shoulder. Sandra kissed my cheek. She smelled expensive. She looked around my entryway the way a buyer looks at a property they've already priced in their head. Lovely to see you, Gabe, she said. She had started calling me Gabe 6 months ago. I had not invited it. Dinner was civil. It was almost pleasant. Derek talked about his work. Rick said very little and ate a great deal of Margaret's stuffing, which I took as an accidental compliment. Sandra asked twice about my health in the way people ask when they are trying to establish a record of concern. I told her I felt fine. I had my annual physical last month. My doctor says I have the blood work of a man 15 years younger. Sandra's smile didn't reach her eyes. We finished eating. I cleared the plates. When I came back from the kitchen, Sandra had placed the leather folio on the table and opened it. There were papers inside, clean, official-looking, a physician's statement at the top, a multi-page legal document below it. "Walter," Sandra said, in the careful tone of someone who has rehearsed, "we've been worried about you. Living alone out here, the size of this house, managing everything by yourself since Margaret. We want to make sure you're protected." I sat down. I looked at the papers. She continued, "We've spoken with a specialist, Dr. Pearson. He's reviewed your situation and he's prepared a preliminary assessment. This," she tapped the document, "is a voluntary guardianship agreement. It would give Derek authority to manage your financial affairs and make certain decisions on your behalf. Just a precaution, just so nothing falls through the cracks." I looked at Derek. He was looking at the table. I picked up the document. I read it slowly. I turned each page. Sandra and Rick watched me. Derek did not. The audio recorder in my cardigan pocket was capturing every syllable. The document was not a voluntary guardianship agreement. It was a durable power of attorney with financial control provisions that would have given Derek immediate authority over every account in my name, plus the right to arrange the sale of real property on my behalf. Dr. Pearson's statement described me as showing early signs of cognitive decline with limited capacity for complex financial decision-making. I had never met Dr. Pearson. I turned the last page and found the signature line. "Walter," Sandra said softly, "we just want to help." I picked up the pen she had set beside the document. "Derek," I said. He looked up. For the first time since they'd arrived, he looked directly at me. "You want me to sign this?" He swallowed. "Dad, it's just, we want to make sure." "I want you to say it," I said. "Not Sandra. You. Do you want me to sign this?" Something moved across his face. Shame, maybe. Or something that used to be shame and had curdled into something harder. "Yeah, Dad, I do. It's the right thing." I nodded slowly. I uncapped the pen. Then I set the pen down without signing. "No," I said. The word sat there. Simple. Clean. Sandra straightened in her chair. "Walter." I turned to her. "This document describes a man with cognitive decline. I have never been evaluated by Dr. Pearson or by any physician for cognitive function. I had a full neurological screening 14 months ago as part of a post-retirement health review. The results were normal in every category. I have the documentation." She opened her mouth. I continued. "This is also not a voluntary guardianship agreement. It is a durable power of attorney with sale of property clauses. If I signed this, Derek would have the legal authority to list this house within 30 days without my further consent. I spent 35 years reading documents exactly like this one, Sandra. Usually, I was reading them as evidence." The room went very quiet. Sandra's composure held for about 4 more seconds. Then she leaned forward and placed both palms flat on the table. "You are 67 years old and you live alone in a house that is worth $900,000, and you have no plan for what happens when you can't manage it anymore. We are trying to help you before it becomes a crisis. This is what families do." "My son's family is not trying to help me," I said. "My son's family is trying to solve a financial problem on my property." Derek pushed back his chair. His face had gone red. "Dad, that's not... You don't know what you're talking about." "I know about the loan, Derek. The one you and Rick co-signed 18 months ago." Rick went completely still. "I know about the lender. I know about the default. And I know about Sandra's audit at work. I have known about all of it for 8 months." Sandra stood up. Her chair scraped hard across the hardwood. I also know that the loan was paid off 2 months ago, in full." Derek stopped moving. I turned to look at him directly. $180,000. Cleared. Anonymous wire. November 4th. "You received the satisfaction letter. I know you did because I have a copy." The color left Derek's face so fast it was like watching a light switch off. "That was me," I said quietly. "I paid your debt, every dollar. I gave you a clean slate, son. I wanted to see what you would do with it." Silence. Derek's voice came out barely above a whisper. Why didn't you?" "Because a man who genuinely needs help comes to ask for it," I said. "He doesn't wait 2 months, arrange a family dinner, and arrive with forged physician statements and a power of attorney already prepared. Something broke open in Derek then, but it did not break toward remorse. It broke toward something uglier. He crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed me by the lapels of my cardigan. "You think you're so smart," he said. His voice was shaking. "You always thought you were smarter than everyone." His grip tightened. "Sign the papers, Dad. Just sign them." "Derek, let go." He didn't. He pulled me forward and shoved. I went back hard into the bookshelf behind me. The edge caught me above my right eyebrow, a sharp, electric impact, the kind that tells you immediately it is more than a bruise. I grabbed the shelf to steady myself. I felt the warmth of blood almost instantly, welling up and starting to run toward my eye. The room was frozen. Rick was on his feet. Sandra had both hands over her mouth. Not in horror, in calculation. I could see it. She was already figuring out how this played. I straightened. I pressed the sleeve of my cardigan against my forehead. I looked at my son. He was breathing hard. He looked at his own hands, like he was not sure they belonged to him. I said nothing. I walked to the entryway. I took my keys from the hook. I put on my coat. "Where are you going?" Sandra called after me. Her voice had a new edge to it, controlled panic. "Ridgeline Medical," I said, without turning around. "I need someone to look at this." I stepped out onto the porch. The November air was sharp and cold against the blood on my face. From the driveway, I did not look back at the house. I started the car. I drove exactly at the speed limit. My hands were steady. My heart rate was elevated but controlled the same way it had been every time I had walked into a room where I knew someone was lying and I was about to prove it. The feeling was not fear. It was focus. In the Ridgeline Medical parking lot, I sat for a moment before going in. I opened my phone. I typed 12 words to Frank Holloway. "Phase 1 is complete. Ridgeline Urgent Care. Come when you can." I went inside. The intake nurse, a tired, efficient woman named Carol, looked up from her desk and did the rapid visual calculation that medical professionals do when someone walks in bleeding. She was on her feet in under 3 seconds. "What happened, sir? Did you fall?" "I did not fall," I said. "I was assaulted. I need this wound treated, and I need you to document it as such before you clean it. Photos first, please. I'll need everything for a police report." Carol looked at me for a moment with the expression people have when they are not sure whether they're dealing with a very calm emergency or a very eccentric one. Then she called the attending physician. The attending was a young woman, Dr. Morrow, who cleaned the wound with the brisk efficiency of someone who had seen significantly worse. 4 stitches. The laceration was not deep enough to be dangerous, but it was clean-edged and photographable, which was exactly what I needed. I asked her to include in the chart a clinical description of the wound angle and whether it was consistent with impact against a flat-edged surface at adult shoulder height. She paused, looked at me, and then wrote it down. "I need the full itemized bill," I told the desk clerk when they were processing my paperwork. "I won't be using insurance. I want a paper receipt, paid in full, with today's date and the time of service." She looked uncertain. "Sir? Your Medicare?" "I understand. I'm paying out of pocket. I want the receipt to reflect a specific transaction time." She processed it. I paid. I took the sealed envelope photos, chart, receipt, and tucked it into my coat pocket. I walked out to the waiting area. Frank Holloway was already there. He was wearing his weekend clothes, a heavy flannel shirt, and a down vest, his white hair pushed back from the cold. He looked at the bandage above my eyebrow with an expression that was somewhere between anger and something more complicated. "You all right?" he asked. 4 stitches, I said. "I've had worse." "I know you've had worse. That's not what I asked." "I'm fine, Frank. Phase 1 is exactly where we planned it would be." He sat down next to me. He set his briefcase on his knees. 2 uniformed officers came through the main entrance, then Officer Webb, who was maybe 35 with the alert posture of someone who still believed in the paperwork, and Officer Torres, older, quieter, the kind of officer who had learned to listen more than he spoke. They had been called by the medical staff, mandatory reporting assault resulting in injury. "Mr. Kane?" Webb said. "That's me," I said. "We've received a report of an assault." Can you tell us what happened? I could feel Frank watching me. We had discussed this part. We had spent 2 hours on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks earlier, sitting in Frank's office, going through exactly what I would and would not say in this specific conversation. I looked at Officer Webb. I described the dinner calmly and factually. I said that my son had grabbed me and pushed me into a bookshelf when I declined to sign a legal document. I gave him Derek's full name, Sandra's full name, and the home address. I said the incident had occurred at approximately 3:15 in the afternoon. Then Officer Torres leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Kane, do you want to press charges?" Here it was. I took a breath. I looked at my hands. I let a beat of silence pass. Not the silence of a man who is frightened, but the silence of a man performing something very carefully. "Not tonight," I said. I spoke quietly. "He's my son. I need to think." Torres and Webb exchanged a look. The look of two experienced officers who have seen this 100 times. "Sir," Webb said gently, "what your son did is a crime, regardless of the relationship. The injury—" "I know," I said. "I know. I just can. I have a little time. I'm not going back to the house tonight. I have somewhere to stay." Frank spoke up beside me, his voice even and professional. "Officers, I'm Frank Holloway. I'm Mr. Kane's attorney. My client is clearly in shock and not in a position to make a prosecutorial decision this evening. He'll be staying with me tonight. I'll be managing all communications going forward. If you need to make contact, here's my card." He handed it over. The business card did what business cards from attorneys who charge $400 an hour tend to do. Torres took it. "Very well, counselor." He handed me a small card with a case number and a phone number. "Mr. Kane, please reconsider. In our experience, this kind of thing escalates." "Thank you, officer," I said. "I appreciate your time." They left. The moment the automatic doors closed, I stopped performing. I sat up straighter. I met Frank's eyes. "Did it work?" I asked. He allowed himself a small, careful smile. "They'll make a welfare check at the house within the hour. They'll tell Derek and Sandra that you're safe, that you're with a friend, and that you declined to press charges. And Sandra will think she got away with it," I said. Frank nodded slowly. "She'll move fast. She expected you to be frightened. When frightened, people won't press charges. The people who hurt them usually believe they've established dominance. She'll accelerate." "Exactly," I said. "And when people like Sandra accelerate, they make mistakes they cannot undo." Frank drove me to his firm's guest suite, not the Four Seasons, not a hotel, but a private apartment on the 3rd floor of his office building that his firm kept for exactly these situations. High profile, high discretion. The kind of place where documents got signed and decisions got made without anyone knowing they were being made. I sat in the quiet of that apartment and opened my laptop. 40 minutes after I had left, Officer Webb's cruiser had pulled into my driveway. I watched it on the camera feed, a 6-panel split screen, every room of my house in clear, high definition. The audio was pristine. Derek answered the door. He had changed his shirt. He told the officers that I had been confused and agitated all afternoon. He said I had tripped over my own feet near the bookshelf. He said I had been showing signs of forgetfulness and paranoia for months, and that the family was deeply concerned. Sandra appeared behind him, her eyes appropriately red, her voice carefully modulated into worry. "We just want to find him," she told Officer Webb. "He's not well. We're afraid he's going to hurt himself." I watched Derek lie to a uniformed police officer with the fluency of someone who had convinced himself the lie was true. I watched Sandra's hand find his arm, steadying him, coaching him, the conductor of a small and desperate orchestra. Webb told them I was safe and staying with an attorney. I watched Sandra's face register something she tried to hide, a flash of recalculation. She had expected me to be more frightened. She had expected me to be running. The officers left. I watched Sandra spin on Derek the moment the door closed. "He's with the lawyer," she said. Her voice was low and very controlled. "That means he's building something. We have to move tonight." Derek sat down heavily on the couch, his father's couch. He put his hands over his face. Sandra crouched in front of him. "Derek, listen to me. We are not done. We have Dr. Pearson's statement. We have the filing ready. If we get the emergency petition to the court clerk first thing tomorrow morning, we establish the narrative before he does. He becomes the confused man who fled. We become the family who was trying to help. What if he presses charges? Derek said from behind his hands. He said he wasn't going to. Sandra's voice was brisk, certain. He's scared. He's old, and he's alone, and he doesn't want to see his son arrested. We use that. We use it tonight. She took out her phone. She called someone. I listened to her explain, quickly and precisely, that she needed Dr. Pearson's emergency certification filing submitted by 8 a.m. She said she would transfer payment immediately. She said there was a time-sensitive situation with a family member who was showing signs of violent instability and had fled his residence. Violent instability. Me. I wrote down the time. I wrote down her exact words. Frank's server was already capturing it, but I wrote it down anyway. Old habit. Then I watched Derek stand up and walk to the kitchen. He opened his laptop on the counter. He called my bank. I could see the screen from the kitchen camera, and I could hear his voice clearly enough through the ceiling fixture. He gave my account number. He explained that his father was missing and potentially incompetent. He said he needed the accounts frozen for my protection. He said he was my son and next of kin. The account manager told him that the account had no designated authorized party on file, that HIPAA and financial privacy regulations prevented any action on his request, and that my account, the checking account he knew about, the one with $11,000 in it, had been fully closed and zeroed out 3 weeks earlier on my instruction. I watched Derek's shoulders drop. I watched Sandra come to stand beside him, reading the screen. He cleaned it out, she said. Her voice was very flat now. He knew before tonight. Derek turned to look at her. He just looked at her. He didn't say anything. Sandra set her jaw. Check the house. The safe. Whatever he left behind, we find it and we use it. There has to be documentation for the trust. If we have the trust documents, we can contest the structure. We can argue undue influence. We can. Derek, Sandra. Her brother Rick's voice came from the living room, low and careful. Guys, the police were just here. If we start going through the house, and he has cameras... He doesn't have cameras, Sandra said sharply. He's a retired old man. He has a landline and a laptop he barely knows how to use. Rick went quiet. He sat back down. I finished my scotch. Frank had left a bottle of single malt on the kitchen counter, which I appreciated more than I said, and I sent him a text. They're moving. Meet me here at 7 a.m. Bring Miller. Detective Miller was Frank's contact at the Asheville PD, White Collar and Fraud Division. He had been briefed 6 weeks ago. He and his partner had been waiting for a triggering event that crossed the line from conspiracy to prosecutable conduct. Tonight had given them several. Frank arrived at 6:55 with Detective Miller and Miller's partner, Detective Cho. We sat at the small table in the apartment's kitchen, and I walked them through the previous 12 hours. I played the audio from my cardigan recorder. I showed them the camera footage. I showed them Sandra's phone call to Dr. Pearson and the specific language she had used. I showed them Derek's call to my bank. Frank laid out the legal architecture on the table, like a draftsman unrolling blueprints. We have the following, he said, and his voice was the voice he used in courtrooms, the one that suggested the verdict was already written. Assault causing physical injury documented by medical staff. Photographed, charted, time-stamped. Filing a false police report, the welfare check recorded both Derek and Sandra, providing a fabricated account of this evening's events. Conspiracy to commit fraud, 6 months of recorded planning, culminating in tonight's presentation of a document supported by a fraudulent physician's evaluation. Attempted financial fraud, the call to the bank. He paused. And if they enter the house tonight with intent to search for documents? Then we add breaking and entering and attempted theft, Miller said. Frank looked at me. Will they go back tonight? I thought about Sandra's face when she learned the account was empty. The flat, hard certainty of a woman who had burned every other option. Yes, I said. She has nowhere else to go. At 9:47 that evening, my porch camera showed Derek's car pulling back into the driveway. They had left around 8, the dinner cleaned up, the table cleared, the house locked. They had come back. Derek used his key. Sandra went in first. I watched them move through my house. Sandra went straight to my office. She knew where I kept the file cabinet. She had been in that room before, and she pulled the drawers open and sorted through files with the speed of someone who had thought about exactly where to look. She found nothing she could use. The important documents did not live in that cabinet. She moved to the bookshelf in the hallway. She checked behind books. She knocked on the wall panels looking for a hollow space. Rick checked the living room. He lifted paintings. He checked under the area rug. Derek stood in the hallway and did nothing. He stood with his hands in his pockets and watched his wife dismantle his father's house. At 10:22, Sandra was in the master bedroom. She opened Margaret's wardrobe. She pulled sweaters off the shelf, checking for anything hidden behind them. She found a small jewelry box on the top shelf. Margaret's remaining pieces, the ones I hadn't put into the trust inventory yet. I watched Sandra open it. I watched her hold up a pearl bracelet in the light. I watched her put it in her coat pocket. That was the moment. That was theft. Tangible, camera documented, incontrovertible. I called Frank. "They're in the bedroom," I said. Sandra just took the bracelet. Margaret's pearl bracelet. I heard him exhale slowly. "I'll call Miller." 20 minutes. 20 minutes was faster than I expected. I was watching the hallway camera when my front door opened. Not forced, not broken. Opened with the same spare key I had given Frank years ago. And Detective Miller, Detective Cho, and Frank walked in with 2 uniformed officers. I was with them. They found Sandra in the hallway, coming out of the second bedroom with a small wooden box that contained the deeds to the Vermont property documents that were now legally held by the trust and worth less than the paper they were printed on, if taken from this house, but worth everything as evidence of intent. She froze. Miller held up his badge. "Miss Sandra Kane?" The expression on her face lasted only a fraction of a second. Shock, then recalculation, then the performance, her face softening into confusion, her hands coming up open and empty. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "Officers, I'm so glad you're here. We were so worried about Walter. He left this afternoon. He was confused. He wasn't himself. We came back to check on the house." "Mrs. Kane." Miller's voice was patient and final. "We have audio and video of your entry into this residence, your statements from this afternoon, and your phone call at 9:17 p.m. to a Dr. Raymond Pearson. We have a recording of that call." Sandra went still. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller said. Derek came out of the master bedroom at the sound of voices. He saw me standing at the end of the hallway. He stopped. We looked at each other for a long moment. My son, 44 years old, standing in the house he grew up in the hallway where his mother used to hang his school photographs, looking at his father over the heads of 2 detectives. I don't think he looked like a monster in that moment either. He looked like a man who had made one wrong choice and then spent 18 months building a structure of worse choices on top of it, and had just watched the whole thing fall. I had rehearsed what I would say. I had thought about it for months, what the right words were. What a father says to a son in a moment like this. In the end, I said only, "I paid your debt, Derek. I gave you the way out. This was your choice." He didn't answer. He turned and placed his hands on the wall the way Miller asked him to, without being told twice. Sandra was not quiet. Sandra argued every step of the process, right up until the handcuffs were on. She told Miller he was making a mistake. She told Frank his client had entrapped her. She told me, specifically, looking directly at me down the hall, that I would regret this, that she would fight the trust, that Derek had rights as my son, that I was a paranoid, vindictive, sad old man who had just destroyed his own family over a house. She said it with absolute conviction. She believed it, I think. That was the most clarifying part of the entire evening. Frank stepped forward. He opened his briefcase and removed a bound document. He spoke in the quiet, precise voice of a man who has already won. "Mrs. Kane, the Margaret Kane Irrevocable Trust has been in existence for 4 years. Its structure was reviewed by 2 independent estate attorneys and a judge in Buncombe County. Derek Kane signed a legal instrument 5 years ago when he requested a $120,000 loan for his software startup, surrendering all future inheritance claims against Walter Kane's estate in exchange for that payment. He held up the signature page. He signed this document in front of 2 witnesses and a notary. I am the notary. He had legal counsel present. This has been on file for 5 years. Sandra stared at the page. Then she looked at Derek. Derek, what is that? Derek, what did you sign? Derek looked at the floor. When Walter passes, Frank continued, all assets held by the Margaret Kane Irrevocable Trust will be liquidated and donated in full to the Margaret Kane Scholarship Fund at UNC Asheville, funding first-generation college students. There is no provision for personal inheritance. There never was going to be. The sound Sandra made was not a scream. It was something lower and more hollow than that. It was the sound of someone who has just understood, completely and irreversibly, that they gambled everything on a prize that was never on the table. You can't, she said. Her voice was scraped empty. You can't just you set us up. You tricked us. We're the victims here. We were trying to... No, I said. I walked forward until I was close enough to speak quietly and still be heard. You came into my home. You brought forged documents, supported by a physician who has never examined me. You conspired to have me declared incompetent so that you could sell this house and solve a financial problem that I had already solved for you. And when I said no, my son put his hands on me. I paused. You were never victims. You were just unsuccessful. Miller led them out. I stood in my entryway and listened to the sound of car doors closing. The house was quiet. Frank came to stand beside me. He didn't say anything. He knew when nothing needed to be said. After a while, I went to the kitchen and made coffee. I stood at the window over the sink and looked out at the back porch. It was too dark to see Margaret's garden, but I knew it was there, the rose bushes she planted in the first summer we owned this place. Overgrown now, past the trellis, and halfway across the yard, I had kept them watered. I had not pruned them nearly well enough. She would have had things to say about that. The trial, when it came, was methodical and brief. Frank Holloway in a courtroom is not a theatrical experience. He does not perform. He simply places evidence on the table, in order, and lets it speak. The camera footage, the audio recordings, the medical chart from Ridgeline, the police body camera from the welfare check, showing Sandra describe me as confused and violent, played directly beside the footage of her searching my home that same evening. Dr. Pearson's certification, which Frank had traced back to a pattern of similar filings with 3 other families over the past 4 years. The forensic accountant, Frank, had retained a woman named Patricia Okafor, who had worked with the SEC for 12 years, presented Sandra's embezzlement case as a secondary exhibit. It was not the core charge, but it established motivation and pattern in a way the jury responded to. Sandra's attorney mounted a defense based on coercion and entrapment. He argued that I had lured them into the situation. The judge, an older man with the permanent tired patience of someone who has spent 30 years listening to people explain why their crimes were someone else's fault, let the attorney make his argument, and then let the evidence answer it. The jury took less than 4 hours. Sandra received 9 years for assault, conspiracy to commit fraud, theft, and filing a false report. Her attorney announced they would appeal. That was his job. The evidence was not constructed in a way that lends itself to successful appeals. Derek received 4 years for assault, conspiracy, and perjury. He stood at sentencing and did not speak. He had tried, in the weeks before trial, through a letter that Frank received on my behalf, to explain that he had been manipulated, that Sandra had driven the entire plan, that he had been a man under impossible financial pressure who had made terrible decisions. All of that was probably true. None of it changed what he had done. I read the letter twice. I put it in the file. I didn't write back. Rick cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced charges. He is currently serving 18 months in a minimum security facility in South Carolina and will be released in the spring. The information he provided helped investigators identify 2 other families where Dr. Pearson had been brought in to file fraudulent incompetency petitions. Both of those cases are now in litigation. It is April now. The rose bushes are beginning again. I cut them back in February, properly this time, the way Margaret showed me, and they are coming in thick and even. I have been spending more time on the back porch in the mornings, drinking coffee and watching the mountains go from gray to green as the season turns. Frank and I have formalized something we started discussing last fall, before any of this happened. We are calling it the Kane Holloway Elder Protection Project. It operates out of Frank's firm and through a partnership with a legal aid organization in Asheville. We provide free consultation and legal representation to seniors facing financial exploitation or fraudulent incompetency proceedings. In the 4 months since we went public with it, we have taken on 11 cases. 8 of them involve family members. That number does not surprise either of us. I trace the thin scar above my eyebrow sometimes when I am sitting on the porch. It has faded to a fine white line. It does not hurt. It does not trouble me. It is just the mark that a bad moment left behind, the way most bad moments do. And I have had enough years to understand that the marks are not the story. The story is what you do with the time that comes after them. Margaret used to say that the only thing worse than being taken advantage of is failing to protect someone else from the same experience. She said it in the context of something small and domestic, a neighbor's dispute, a friend's bad contract. But she was right, in the larger way she usually was, without knowing she was being particularly wise. I have one photograph of her on my desk now, not the one from the early years, the one everyone expects. This one is from 3 summers ago, late afternoon, standing in the garden with her sleeves rolled up and dirt on her hands, and a look of complete, unself-conscious satisfaction on her face. She had just gotten the roses to do something she had been working toward for 2 seasons. She looked exactly like someone who had taken the long view and been proven right. That is the photograph I see when I sit down at the desk in the morning. That is the one I want to see. The house is quiet. The porch needs a new board on the left side. I noticed it last week and I bought the lumber and I have been putting it off, the way I put off the things that require the other half of a conversation. But I will do it soon. The mountains are visible from the end of the yard on clear days, and I intend to keep the porch in good enough shape to be worth sitting on when they are. What all of this taught me, at the end of 6 months and 4 stitches and a trial and a very long winter, is something I already knew in the abstract, but had never had to practice on my own life. Patience is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. The most effective thing a person can do when someone is moving against them is not to react immediately, but to let the people who mean to harm you believe that you are exactly who they need you to be, right up until the moment they have given you everything you need. Kindness and preparation are not opposites. I was generous with my son for 20 years, and for 7 months I was methodical. One did not cancel out the other. Both were true at the same time. I gave Derek every chance I knew how to give. That is not a wound I carry. What I carry is the knowledge that I protected this house and the memory it holds. That no one slept in Margaret's room who had not earned the right to be there. That her garden is exactly where she left it, tended and returning, and brighter than the winter suggested it would be. Some things you protect quietly, for a very long time, and the only people who ever understand the full weight of what that cost are the ones who tried to take them. They know now. The porch is warm in the April sun. The coffee is good. The mountains are clear today. That is more than enough.